All right, everybody. I have 1:30 Central Time on my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. This is session B4 of the NFIP track, Local Floodplain Manager Processes and Duties. This presentation is being sponsored today by CDM Smith, so we want to give a special shout out to them for helping to make this possible. I'm Alex Van Pelt. I am the NFIP coordinator with the Kentucky Division of Water, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first presentation. It's titled Working Together to Simplify Permitting in the Trinity River Corridor. Our presenter today is Lisa Biggs. She is the Assistant Floodplain Administrator with the City of Fort Worth.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Griffin with Half Associates. I'm speaking today with Jim Keith of Friesen Nichols and Lisa Biggs with the City of Fort Worth. We're speaking on the regional effort that we led to simplify the permitting process within the Trinity River Corridor in North Texas. Our agenda includes an introduction to the Trinity River Corridor Development Certificate, or CDC for short, the improvements that have been made to the CDC model in recent years, and our new NFIP CDC consolidated permitting process. The North Central Texas Council of Governments was established in 1966 as a voluntary association of, by, and for local governments. The COG comprises a 16-county area in North Texas. The North Central Texas Council of Governments includes over 230 member governments, and those include cities, counties, school districts, special districts. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is located in the NCT COG area. The North Central Texas Council of Governments brings together local governments to plan for common needs. The North Central Texas Council of Governments assists local governments in recognizing regional opportunities. The COG assists communities in resolving regional challenges and in developing decisions that are beneficial for all participants. The COG's Environmental and Development Watershed Management Program focuses on water quality, stormwater, and floodplain topics. The COG works with local governments to establish and maintain cooperation on flooding issues to accomplish common goals across the region. The Trinity River Common Vision Program includes 9 cities, 3 counties, 2 special districts, and 4 programmatic partners. This map shows the boundaries of the participating cities and counties. The hatched area is in the Trinity River CDC corridor. On the north side, the hatched area outlined with yellow highlighting is the proposed Denton Creek addition that is considering joining our CDC program. On the southeast side, the hatched area outlined in red is the proposed East Fork addition that is also considering joining our CDC program. In 1990, the Upper Trinity River Basin Reconnaissance Report was prepared in partnership with the member cities and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The Flood Management Task Force was established. The Flood Management Task Force then established the CDC criteria. In 1991, the first edition of the CDC manual was produced. We are currently on our 4th edition and will soon be looking to update to create our 5th edition. The CDC Criteria Manual establishes limits on allowable floodplain encroachments within the Trinity River Corridor. The Criteria Manual requires that the proposed developments within the regulatory footprint to obtain a CDC permit prior to beginning construction. The CDC permit requires current and future development considerations to be considered. No rise is allowed in the water surface elevation, and valley storage must be maintained. A CDC permit application is completed by the developer or property owner and submitted to the appropriate governing entity, typically a city or county. Once the city or county is in agreement that the CDC requirements have been satisfied, Then they collect the review fee and forward that along with the application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the TCEQ, the Texas Water Development Board, the COG, and to all of the participating entities for review and comment. Essentially, this is everyone's opportunity to raise his or her hand and ask questions within a 30-day review period. After questions have been answered and USACE has completed its detailed review of the models, the city or county may then issue the CDC permit for the proposed project to move forward. As you can see, the CDC process provides for controlled and consistent criteria for development in the Trinity River corridor floodplain with review by the region and oversight. The map and pie chart on this slide were created by Jerry Cotter of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The map shows the 6 core flood projects in the blue shaded watersheds. The reservoirs located in the green shaded watersheds do not have any flood control capacity. All of these reservoir projects flow into the Trinity River corridor. As you can see in the pie chart, the CDC corridor provides over 1/3 of the flood storage capacity in the area and is greater than any of the flood control projects within the watershed. Protecting the flood capacity of the Trinity River corridor is critical to reducing flooding now and in the future. At this time, Jim will speak with you about the CDC model updates.
Hi, I'm Jim Keith. As Stephanie noted, the Trinity River flood corridor that runs through the DFW Metroplex provides significant flood storage for the region. The Trinity River flood reconnaissance study that was completed by the Corps in the late 80s, early 90s started with development of hydrologic and hydraulic models. They were originally developed using HEC-1 and HEC-2. And then that HEC-2 model was later converted to HEC-RAS, although that was prior to the common use of model georeferencing. And so the Corps, when they developed that study, laid out all their cross sections and stream center lines in microstation format and used that to develop the hydraulic model. And this meant that we had all those spatial orientations of the cross sections and the stream center lines, but they weren't in the HEC-RAS model itself. It just had this kind of stick figure schematic format that you see here on the screen. When this model was developed, it served as the new effective FEMA model, circa 1990, as well as the initial CDC model. And coincident to those efforts, Dallas was experiencing some of its worst flooding in 1989 and 1990. Although the CDC model and the FEMA model started out the same and serve very similar purposes, they have some differences in criteria that led to changes in those models at the time. One of those is that the CDC model includes discharges for the standard project flood, or SPF, which is about an 800-year event. And the CDC model also includes future discharges that were originally based on a 2050 land use projection. Another key difference is that the LOMR process has models updated after construction of a project. And so that the LOMR model and the FEMA model represented as-built conditions. Whereas in the CDC process, the model was reviewed and approved prior to construction, but it was not able to be updated. There was no process for updating that after construction. And so as a result, the CDC model really represented as approved conditions. That led to, sometimes projects get built slightly differently than they were when they were designed, and those differences weren't captured. Then you also had some grandfathered projects that were approved for a CDC permit, but then never constructed. And then finally, the CDC fee structure allowed for the Corps to review permit applications as they came in and review the model and provide comments. But it wasn't enough to cover long-term model maintenance and keeping the model up to date, similar to the MP2 fee structure is. And so because of these changes, these models slowly diverged over time. And that model divergence led to a lot of issues and challenges really for everyone, for the users of the model and those that approved it. You had two different models that had different data, different criteria, different results. And that led to some confusion, a lot of different extra work and review on both parts. And then the non-georeferenced model made it difficult to locate cross-sections in the model, to add new cross-sections where needed to model a proposed project. And so all these things led to additional schedule and budget challenges. And then finally, as you have two different models that are both regulatory models for the same area, they have different results in watershed elevations, leads to kind of a lack of clarity and confusion in terms of which model is correct, which one do I use, where and when. So all these challenges ultimately led for renewed interest from COG, FEMA, and the Corps to consolidate these models back together and figure out a better way for model maintenance. And so that started a few years ago. FEMA took the lead. Their contractor, the RAMP team, started by georeferencing the CDC model to get it up to date and spatially correct, and then consolidate that with the effective NFIP model. They incorporated approximately 50 CDC projects into that georeference model. Those were projects that had been recently approved after May 2017. And so they got all that combined into a single HECRAS project file. Now again, that's a single HECRAS project. There's still different geometry files and flow files in there that are needed for these two different programs, but it got it all into one single model that can be maintained by the Corps, and then that can be made available for download from the COG website. And all that initial effort took a little over $200,000 over 18 months. Let's talk for a second about the georeferencing process. The original Corps microstation files were brought into GIS, put in the right location spatially, and that was done for hundreds of sections and the full stream center lines throughout the model. As part of that, they identified some missing sections. There were times when the model had been updated to add some sections, but those didn't get captured back on the work maps. And it also let them correct some minor reach length mismatches on the river station. One other interesting thing that was done is going back to the original 1991 topography to figure out how to spatially shift these cross-section profiles within the model. And so they took those original cross-section profiles, compared that to the original 1991 topography to get those cross-sections aligned correctly in space in the right coordinates. And then once they were aligned, they truncated or extended those models where necessary so that they matched the model sections and they were extended to capture the entire inundation. So you can see at the end of that, they came out with this nice looking georeference model. It's easy to see where you are along the corridor from the Fort Worth side in the west and the confluence of the Clear Fork and West Fork, all the way through the mid-cities to the Dallas floodway and beyond. And this was really a huge step for everyone, for the communities involved and for those that use the model on a regular basis. This was a huge win. Then coming out of that, we realized it was a great opportunity to keep this partnership moving forward. We've invested all this into a single consolidated model. Now we want to find a way to keep that model up to date and prevent some of those issues and challenges from coming back over the next 10 years. So the need was identified for this combined single process. We wanted to take the NFIP process, the Clomer-Lomer process, the CDC permitting process, the other local criteria, and combine that into a single process that can be maintained, make sure all criteria is met, and maintain a single model that's up to date. The other opportunity was to bring some new features to the program. One thing that was really desired by all parties was an online model management system to make it easier to get the latest model, to make changes, to check it in and out. We did some research on some other similar systems that have been developed by the San Antonio River Authority and Harris County Flood Control District, to name a few. So the COG formed the model consolidation team. It was chaired by Stephanie Griffin and had membership from FEMA, the Corps, COG, local communities, and the consulting community to evaluate options and define an improved process. Lisa's going to take it from here to walk you through what the team did and how that final process looked at the end.
Hi, I'm Lisa Biggs, and as Jim was discussing just earlier, having these two different models and processes can really make it confusing and complicated to be able to manage development and permitting within the Trinity River corridor. Since FEMA has already currently put in a lot of work and created a new modernized georeferenced consolidated model for the NFIP, we thought this is the perfect opportunity to be able to get these two processes back in sync and merged. The Flood Management Task Force formed a team of members from local communities, the Corps Fort Worth office, FEMA Region 6, and consultants that had been involved with the model consolidation process. Over approximately 2 years, the team met multiple times to discuss the 20 tasks that we were given as part of our scope of work in our team charter. We really started off first with doing a bunch of research. We wanted to see what were our current CDC and FEMA models, how many versions did we have, where were they located, how were people able to obtain them, and just what kind of issues we were having with those. Then we wanted to look at our current NFIP and CDC processes. We created flowcharts for those processes. We really delved deep into the internal processes at each organization, at the Corps and FEMA and the local governments, to see, you know, what do they really do, and how are there ways that we can try to get those connected and streamlined. Then we also started talking to some other organizations. We talked to San Antonio River Authority, we talked to Harris County Flood Control District and FEMA, trying to see how were they managing their models, how were they distributing their models and storing everything, what were they finding that worked for them, what didn't work, and what would they do different if they were starting over again, and just trying to help us figure out what would be the best way for our purposes. Once we had kind of looked at everything and really seen where all our issues were, we started thinking, okay, how are we going to improve these? What can we do? And it really kind of boiled down to two main things. We needed to improve communication and coordination, improve it between the community and COG and the Corps, between FEMA and the Corps, and between the applicants. Everybody needed to coordinate a little bit better and more clearly and really know what their roles were and what they were supposed to do. We also knew we really needed to come up with a much better way to maintain our model. We're going to go through all this work, have this new great improved model. We really don't want to have to go through this whole process every 5 years where we have a major project to update the model and get it back up to our standards. So we needed a process where we would be able to continually update it and keep it in sync with both the FEMA and the CDC process. So that kind of led us to three main goals. We wanted a unified NFIP CDC HECRAS model, and that model needs to have both geometries for the FEMA, which is the current effective, what's on the ground kind of geometry, and then the CDC geometry, which are our future or proposed geometries. And we also wanted to have the FEMA flows and the CDC future flows included into that one model. By doing that, we'll get rid of that two model system, and we'll just have one model that is easier to track and keep up to date. We also wanted to come up with an easy to follow, streamlined process. We wanted something that was very clear, that everybody would be able to follow, and just clearly identified what the responsibilities were for each stakeholder. And that all kind of led to, we really needed a model management website to kind of control and run this whole program. So we need a website where it'll house the most recent version of the model, where anybody can go and download it. It'll also keep the older versions for, I guess, historic purposes. It'll also, in the future, be where communities can go and directly submit those CDC applications, and then where they can go and look and see where is that application at in the review process, and just really be able to keep track of where it's at. So taking all those discussions that we had, we came up with several recommendations. First, we decided that it would be NCT COG that would develop and host that website. We just decided that that was going to be the easiest way to do this. The Corps and FEMA being those federal agencies, there was more security and more red tape that we would have to go through. And this way we have more control over our website and be able to update it on the fly as we need to. Also, we decided that the Corps would be the responsible agency for maintaining that new model. So it'll be up to them to make sure that the model will be updated with the latest CLOMAR and CDC geometries and the latest LOMAR completed project geometries. We decided when we were looking at FEMA's LOMAC process that we really can't change anything in their official process, but we do want to have more communication during the review and after approvals. They need to share those approved models and reports with the local communities after they've approved them so that we can then forward that on to the Corps. We determined it will be the applicant's responsibility to make sure that they are downloading and using the most current NFIP CDC model when they are starting to work on their CDC, CLOMAR, and LOMAR applications. They'll be able to just go to that website now and download it from there and have a direct version so they know exactly what they're using, and they won't have to go and try to contact FEMA or the Corps or the local community and just hope that they have the best one. Not all projects are going to require a CLOMAR, but for those that do, we've decided that we've figured out this process where they will be able to do the CLOMAR process and have the CDC review process going at the same time to try to save that time. Instead of having the CLOMAR go through first and then going through the CDC process, we're trying to align those two processes. Now that's going to require a little more coordination between the FEMA reviewers and the Corps reviewers while they're doing their reviews. And there is a potential for the CDC to be approved before the CLOMAR is approved. So for those CLOMARs, once that CLOMAR is approved by FEMA, then it is up to the local community to make sure that that proposed project geometry is going to match what was approved in the CDC. If it doesn't, then it's up to the applicant to go back and update that CDC and kind of go back through that review and get that approved. Once everything is the same, then the local floodplain administrator can approve the CDC permit and then issue floodplain development permits. So once that CDC permit has been approved, that kind of triggers the Corps to be able to update that model geometry. They'll include that CLOMAR or CDC model geometry into the CDC and then upload that into the up onto the COG website. So that becomes the latest version of the model. So once that proposed project's been completed, then they will be required to obtain as-built survey or record drawings, depending on what the community standards are requiring, and incorporate that data into the FEMA and the CDC geometry when they are working on their LOMAR submittal. When they do submit the LOMAR submittal, they will now be required to also submit a Corps model maintenance fee. This fee is going to allow the Corps to complete their work post-CDC to update the model with the completed project geometries. And this is something we figured we must have now. Once the FEMA has approved the LOMAR, then that model will be sent to the community, and the community will forward that on to the Corps, who will incorporate that information into both geometries and update that model, and then get that back up onto the website so that it becomes the latest and greatest version of the model. So taking all that information, we put together a memo that included all our findings and recommendations and a flow chart with the new process that would be easy to follow. We presented this information to the Flood Management Task Force last November for their review, and they approved it at our January meeting this year. So now we will create a final version of this so that we can present this to the Trinity River Common Vision steering team this fall. All right, so we've done a bunch of work. Now what are we going to do? We still have a lot to do before we can really implement the whole process. We need to catch up this new model. We found out as we were doing this that the FEMA's new model does not include newer approved CDC models from May 2017 and on. So those projects need to get incorporated. We also need to include those future flows for the CDC portion of the model. The Corps has already put together a scope of work, so that they can start this process. And NCT-COG is working on obtaining the funds so that we can begin this project here in the near future. We also are going to need to update the CDC manual to a 5th edition. That way we can incorporate all these changes that we've identified and also incorporate the extension to the east that we're also in the process of doing. So at the same time, we need to deploy the consolidated model website. COG staff have already been working to put this website together. They did show us a draft at our April meeting, and so we're excited to see this get finalized and released out to the public so that we can start using it. We'll start off originally just as a model website. Finally, we're going to have to work together, all the organizations, to really implement the process at your organizational level. So for communities, that means they will need to adopt the new CDC manual and potentially make changes to their ordinance to revise the processes that they have. It's gonna take several steps to get to the point where we can, start using the new model and really fully implement this process. But we're really looking forward to this. It's been a great collaborative effort with everybody, and we're excited to get this moving forward. So with that, if you have any questions, comments, or need information from us, please feel free to contact us and we'll take any questions. Thank you.
All right, guys. So big thank you to our presenters today, Lisa, Jim, and Stephanie. We had several questions come in the Q&A box, but we're not going to have time, unfortunately, to get to all of them. But we are going to be able to do a couple. So the first one that I think we're going to do is, how did you get local communities to volunteer in the CDC?
So I'm going to take that one. The local communities wanted this permitting process. They wanted to know what was happening in the Trinity River and how that was going to impact them. And so they had the opportunity to participate financially, which then gave them the opportunity to review the CDC permit applications before those permits were actually issued by the local jurisdiction.
Okay, great. The other one we're going to get to is, do you have an SOP for when your permitting /CLOMAR/LOMAR process?
All right, so I'll take that one. So as part of our process, we did come up with this memo with all our recommendations on how we were going to change all those different processes. And we're putting that all together. We're going to be putting together a final memo for this. And this is all going to go into updating our CDC manual. So that's really our SOP. And it's going to include all the information for the CDC process and following the LOMAR and CLOMAR process. And it'll have that flow chart in there to easily identify how to go through that process and who's got what responsibilities. So we'll be working on all of that here in the future. I'm sure COG will be putting together a committee and a team to work on that. They'll start that work here this fall. We'll start working on all of that and getting that out there. And as we go through this process, I know we'll have more meetings and communications with all the local communities that are involved to get them up to date and get their input on how we want to do this.
Great. Well, guys, thank you again. Big shout out again, like I said, to Lisa, Jim, and Stephanie. Guys, thanks so much for your presentation today.
All right. Thank you all
you.
for listening.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So next up, we are going to go ahead and move into our next presentation. Our next one is titled "The Big One Hit, Now What?" This one is being presented by Lori Laster. She is the Stormwater Management Engineer at Papio, Missouri River Natural Resources District.
The big one hit. Now what? First, I want to manage expectations for this presentation. I want to share what we did well as a state after the 2019 spring flooding, but I also want to share what we could have done better so that others can consider what changes they could implement now to make life easier in the future. But of course, there are a few disclaimers and a few things I want to make very, very clear. First, these are my own personal observations, experiences, and opinions. I'm not trying to throw anyone or any group under the bus. In fact, one of my colleagues suggested that the alternate title for this presentation could be called A View from Under the Bus. Also, I'm not trying to shame anyone. We all tried our best to deal with the situation, and we did everything we could to the best of our abilities. I don't necessarily have all the answers either. I try to provide some suggestions, but they may not work for your community, or they may not work at all. I don't know. And I would welcome any feedback if anybody has solutions to some of the problems presented. Again, I'm under the bus with everyone else, but I'm not going to be naming names. So who am I to judge or to give this presentation? First, I'm a certified floodplain manager. Second, my job as a project manager for the Papio, Missouri River Natural Resources District requires me to support communities within our district in their floodplain management programs. The Papio, Missouri River Natural Resources District is one of 23 districts in Nebraska. The Nebraska NRD system is unique in that the state legislature in 1972 created a system to combine over 150 special district governments that all dealt with natural resources in some way, shape, or form. Each district is based on watershed boundaries and has similar climatic and resources traits within that district. Each district is autonomous and has the ability to levy a property tax to implement programs and projects to manage those resources in the way appropriate for that area. The Papio, Missouri River District is the smallest district area-wide, but we have the largest population base as we cover the Omaha metro area. But we also deal with some of the rural communities along the Missouri River. So part of my job is to provide technical assistance to communities to help them implement their floodplain management programs. I review and provide recommendations on floodplain development permits, new development, and applications for map changes. I also manage different types of mitigation projects outside of supporting those programs. One project in particular that's important for this presentation, I manage targeted buyout programs for flood-prone neighborhoods. And I've also served on the board of directors for the Nebraska Floodplain and Stormwater Managers Association for several years. And through that role, I've been able to interact with floodplain managers from across the state. So what happened in February? First, we had record moisture. Most places across the state average about 5 to 6 inches of snow for the month of February. And what we saw in February 2019 was most places received over 20 inches of snow in February alone. Accompanying all that snow was record cold, which led to the formation of very thick ice on the rivers heading into March. And then on top of that, we had a rapid warm-up that led to a bomb cyclone that deposited rain across all of that snow and ice. I'm not a weather expert, but my understanding of the bomb cyclone is that we had an area of very warm air and an area of very cold air mixing quickly to form what's essentially a hurricane over land. Our state climatologist has said this might be equivalent to about a Category 2 hurricane. So we had saturated frozen ground, a couple of feet of snow on top of that. The rivers had 18 to 24 inches of ice on them. And then we had rapid warm up followed by rain. Rain and snowmelt had no place to go. And the ice on the rivers broke up very quickly, and that caused ice jam flooding. The Nebraska Department of Natural Resources has put together this story map that I'm showing here. And it will walk you through the entire event. If you're interested, you can either scan this code with your phone or type in that link. And it's definitely worth the time to read through and scroll through all the pictures that they provided. So as a result of the flood events in March, we recorded high water at 24 strain gauges, historic high water. Disasters were declared in 81 of 93 of our counties. 41 levee breaches were reported, 4 people died, and over 400,000 acres of farmland was unable to be planted. And this just wasn't just a few days of flooding. The Missouri River was above flood stage well into the fall, and many other rivers were running high for their seasonal normals as well. So we had this event and we needed to respond. And I first, like to talk about a few positives. I mean, 4 deaths is horrific, but as widespread as the event was, it could have been much worse. So the response by our first responders and our emergency personnel was incredible. Additionally, after the event, the state, NFSMA and FEMA collaborated to quickly set up trainings for building officials, floodplain administrators, and insurance agents. These trainings were offered at locations throughout the state to minimize travel, especially for smaller communities. Many of our floodplain administrators wear a lot of different hats, and floodplain administration is often a very small part of their job. And many of them had never done a substantial damage estimate before. So of course, we needed to make sure that they could do that. And insurance agents were overwhelmed with the amount of claims, and they needed some training as well. Some things we could have done better, of course, would be to offer these trainings throughout the year and before an event. And, we could have offered a virtual training. Nebraska is a very large state, and, traveling 3 to 4 hours away to attend a training was not necessarily an option for all communities. Other positives, our administration was very proactive with emergency and disaster declarations, which allowed communities to access resources quickly for flood fighting and public assistance and individual assistance as well. And then there's this thing here in Nebraska Nice. I think it was a tourism slogan at one point in time, but people were very quick to help. We had plenty of volunteers, plenty of donations coming in very quickly, and a lot of online fundraisers were set up, and from people all across the country that had ties to Nebraska, and even some that didn't. And many people ended up donating to NFSMA, our floodplain and stormwater group, and not really realizing that we were a professional organization and we weren't necessarily on the ground providing relief for flood victims. We did pass that through to another community fund that is doing that work. But there were some things that were not so positive. Communication during the event was one of them, especially with so many levee breaches. People afterwards said that the evacuation orders were unclear, which led to a lot of rescue operations. Some elderly residents were unaware of what was going on because they either didn't have access to a smartphone or computer, they weren't watching TV or listening to the radio, so they weren't really informed about what they needed to do in the moment. And not all of the elected officials were up to date either. Some of them might have been, an hour or so behind. And when you have an event like a levee breach, that's very important. But they continued to post on social media, which again created some confusion. Our incident command centers worked really closely with first responders and public works departments, but they didn't necessarily include building officials or other departments. So the extent of damages wasn't made clear to other departments who would be key in recovery efforts until much later after the event. So moving forward, it would be good to either modify your existing communications plan or develop a new communications plan that includes all of your departments and elected officials. Give them a guide for what they should and should not do on social media. A lot of people are looking to those elected officials in times of crisis because they know the name, they know the face before they would think to look to a municipal outlet. Additionally, having internal updates for all departments would assist in recovery efforts. Parks departments could begin to plan for cleanup and repairs. Building officials would have an idea of how many structures they may need to inspect, and planning departments could start to develop recovery plans, especially for replacement housing. Another issue that we encountered was the management of volunteer groups. Many of them were able to mobilize before building departments could perform inspections. And so some of these structures were partially demolished before an assessment was done. They were out of state and not familiar with local regulations. But they were still providing advice to property owners, a lot of times based on FEMA minimum standards. And this caused a lot of confusion when they're saying one thing and we have some higher standards in our communities, and when they come in and are told something different, it caused a lot of confusion. A potential solution would be to make sure that you're in regular contact with communities that are in the special flood hazard area so that they know the rules, they know the regulations, they know who to contact in an event like this. And also, these groups, they're posting on social media too, and they're organizing. And so we didn't really think about this or know about this at the time. But I think going forward, we would probably kind of stalk their Facebook pages and stuff to try to attempt to communicate with them before they start working. Another issue that we encountered, so you might be seeing a theme by now. Communication immediately after flooding was also an issue. Just due to the sheer amount of damaged structures, many floodplain administrators and building officials found it difficult to return calls in a timely manner. So neighborhoods with these at-risk populations that had no previous relationship with their floodplain administrators, they really didn't know what was going on. And so they're hearing conflicting information from their neighbors or from these volunteer groups, and their calls are not being returned as quickly as they would like them, and it created a situation where there was tension and animosity and distrust. And then when we were sending out written communication, that didn't help. The form letters were very cold, very matter of fact, and they separate the building from the person living in the building. So to overcome these issues, first, you absolutely have to return phone calls. If you're overwhelmed, enlist some help, do some pre-screening. Even if you don't have anyone else who knows the rules about the floodplain, just have them return a phone call and write down the questions. Have them explain that, we are going to get back to you as soon as we can We're just trying to gather information. Some people, they just want someone to listen to them. And, you know, maybe they don't have a question, or maybe it's a simple 2-minute answer that you can give them, but they need that outlet. You know, another thing, have a town hall. You know, you may have some people who are angry and disruptive, and you might find that you can answer a majority of everyone's questions within that meeting space, rather than, you know, 4 or 5 days on the phone. Also, you know, developing that relationship with your at-risk population. Go and speak to homeowners associations and community groups. Give them an opportunity to meet you face-to-face and to ask the questions that they have. As part of managing a targeted buyout program, I periodically talk with their homeowners associations and just give them the opportunity to ask questions or to air their grievances. I can't necessarily do anything about what they're upset about. And, you know, and I make that clear, but giving them the opportunity to feel heard, they ended up trusting me. And so I spent a lot of time on the phone with these people as well to answer their questions, because they trusted me. And that was a very key part of keeping tension down in some of these neighborhoods. And then evaluate your form letters. You know, it's one thing when someone is applying for a building permit in non-emergency times. Yeah, you can put everything on there. But after this, could you maybe take that 2 to 3 page letter that's just regurgitating your municipal code, put that stuff in a brochure, in a fact sheet, but then make a personal letter that would direct affected homeowners to resources to help them with recovery? Is that something that you would be able to do? And again, you know, it makes you more of a person to them, and they realize that you think of them as a person. A few other issues, determining fair market value for damaged structures pose a challenge. There are several acceptable methods by FEMA guidance, but they can vary widely, the values for the same structure using different methods. So in Nebraska, tax assessed values are generally lower than values for real estate appraisal. And but this data is readily available. And so when you're trying to make 100 or 200 or even more substantial damage determinations, it's easy to use. Unfortunately, this left communities open to mass appeals, because knowing that they were lower, but using that without a multiplier, you know, people were coming in and providing all sorts of other data to show that that was not the value. Also, repair estimates or damage estimates submitted by property owners were very unrealistic sometimes. We had some licensed contractors that gave estimates with very low labor costs. But because it came from a licensed contractor, it was difficult for the community to dispute. And I have no idea how you fix that problem. Floodplain management ordinances also presented some issues. Some communities had cumulative damage or improvement clauses, but it wasn't clear how that cumulative value was calculated. And so it was an easy target for elected officials who just wanted everything to go back to normal, the way it was before. And while we know that's not always the best thing, that we do have to deal with that attitude that's out there. Other clauses in those regulations were targeted as well, but thankfully we have state law that mandates a lot of the higher standards in our communities. So those were those had to stay intact. We had no choice. And then the permit processing. There were massive amounts of floodplain development permits, which would be expected. Within the 2 counties around the Omaha metro area, about 500 permits were processed as a result of the flood. In an average year, we would do maybe 80. And with so many permits, a problem emerged. We knew it was a problem, we just didn't know how widespread it was. We have a lot of structures that are elevated on enclosures that were later converted into finished living spaces. So below the BFE, a finished basement. And obviously this was done without permitting. So, and it was done by maybe the first owner, and now it's been sold 1 or 2 times later. And the current owner doesn't know that this is not legal. So they come in with their permit and we go, wait a minute, why is there a basement here? Why do you have a bedroom or a rec room or whatever else? And so one community ended up developing a decision tree very similar to this one to address that issue. Following the FEMA guidance, this is what we can do, but we will not be issuing permits to repair finished living space that's not supposed to be there. This kept things fair, consistent, and transparent. And so I just want to end with a few pieces of advice. First, self-care is vitally important. If you, your coworkers, or your staff aren't getting adequate breaks and time off, it will lead to illness and or burnout. And we did see this happen. It's not good for the individuals who are experiencing it, but it will also affect how you can support your recovery effort. We all end up working in extra hours in times like these, but we all need adequate rest to stay healthy. And then second, make sure your staff is supported. Dealing with affected residents who have a lot of different emotions, a lot of times they're sad or they're very angry, and that can wear you down. Listening to that, especially when you're in that first phase and you're trying to answer everybody's questions and they want to tell you their story, it's heartbreaking. And it is very hard to deal with anger. When somebody is yelling at you, it's hard to deal with that. And so you need to make sure that your staff feels supported and know that you are going to back them up in any way, shape, or form. We also need to realize that we have one common goal, and that's recovery. This includes your elected officials and your administration and all levels of government. Your elected officials and your administration need to be informed about the rules and why the rules are in place. They need to know where your floodplains are. And they need to really understand that these programs are put in place to make people safer. Also, you need to make sure that you're keeping other agencies informed of your recovery activities and ask that they share theirs. There may be opportunities to partner for things like aerial imagery or survey of damaged areas, or to share data such as high watermark surveys. And this data can help inform future mapping and planning efforts. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, you have to communicate. Talk to those who are directly affected. Talk with your other departments, with your elected officials, with the media. But again, especially with the affected property owners, give them a chance to meet face-to-face to ask questions. Whether it's a town hall or whether it's one-on-one meetings, they need an opportunity to feel like they are being heard. And once everything's calmed down, debrief. Create a safe space. Get everyone in a room together. Emergency managers, first responders, public works, planning, parks department, the mayor's office, whoever. Make sure that they have an opportunity to tell you what went wrong and what went well. So that next time you were prepared and you know that XYZ didn't work, but ABC was spot on. And so do that next time, but also fix what you needed to. And finally, just a little bit of humor to leave you with. As I mentioned earlier, the Missouri River was above flood stage all summer, well into the fall. So flood warning, every day you woke up to a flood warning. And by the middle of summer, some people were a little bit over it. So this saying kept floating around on social media. If I get one more flood warning on my phone today, I will throw it in the Missouri Ocean. And, compared to what it normally looks like, this kind of does look like the Missouri Ocean. I would love to hear any feedback from anyone. If you have ideas or other suggestions on how we can solve these issues, please, there's my contact information. Feel free to call me, send me an email, or if you have questions and you want to talk about some of these ideas further, I would love to hear from you as well. Thank you.
All right, guys. So big shout out. Thank you to Lori for that presentation. We do have a minutes here, so we're going to try and get to some of the Q&A questions. So Lori, thanks for being with us. So the first one I think I want you to answer is what form letters were distributed? How were these letters deemed cold? And what suggestions would you have about making the letters more personable?
So the biggest one that we dealt with was either notifying a homeowner that they have been damaged, that damage had been noticed and they needed to come in for permits. And so it was sometimes there would be one sentence, like, we're sorry for your loss, and then 2 pages of municipal code, like, you have to do this, this, and this. And all of that is very, very important. But it kind of gets lost when, especially with some of the damage that some people had, that was, a total loss to their home. They've lost everything that they've owned, everything they've worked for. And so they were very, very emotional. And then on top of that loss, they're getting a letter that, it's 2 and 3 pages that says, you need to do all of this stuff, and it is by code. And so and a lot of them didn't necessarily have any resources attached into, please, go here to find out more, or, if you need assistance for housing, if you need assistance for food or any of that, none of that was there. So my suggestion for that would be to take a cover letter, a 1-page letter, and express where people can get that assistance. That, there are important things in the attached documents, and then include either a fact sheet that has a step-by-step process they need to do to set up either inspections or permits.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for one more. So did you see any challenges with communities like renters or those who didn't speak English as a first language?
Specifically, within our district, renters were a problem because they didn't necessarily have any rights. And depending on, there was an instance of, especially a mobile home park that was flooded. And so, they were just running the space. And the owner of the mobile home park is having difficulty communicating with them. The community is having trouble tracking down everybody. So yeah, we did have some of those instances. I don't know that, especially when it's not necessarily quite required to keep a log of every renter that was there.
All right, Lori, I think that's our time. So thank you again so much for being with us here today, and thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. So our last presentation today during our session is titled Risk Rating 2.0 and what it might mean to the local floodplain administrator. Our presenter today is Angela Michaels. She is with Principal Engineering with a Mission LLC. So with that, take it away.
Hey everyone, welcome to the 2020 ASFPM National Conference. Glad you're here. My name is Angie Michaels, and I'm going to be presenting to you Risk Rating 2.0 and what it might mean to the local floodplain administrator. So change is something that we're all dealing with right now, isn't it? That's kind of evident by the fact that I'm here in my office and you're wherever you're at, and we're not in Fort Worth, Texas together right now at the conference, right? So along with that theme of change, we've got another change that's going to be coming to us as floodplain administrators. So we're going to talk about Risk Rating 2.0, but before we talk about that, let's talk about what the National Flood Insurance Program is. I don't know if you remember, but I took my floodplain management class at FEMA at Emmitsburg, and one of the things they explained about the National Flood Insurance Program is that it's kind of like a three-legged stool. There's the floodplain management portion of it, flood insurance portion, and the hazard identification or the mapping portion. And all three of those legs work together synergistically to accomplish the goals of the National Flood Insurance Program. So currently, flood insurance rates methods, the current flood insurance rate methods haven't been changed much at all since like the 1970s. Almost like 50 years. They've been almost exactly the same, the method they've used. We know from our work that basically FEMA regulates the 1% chance flood zone or the special flood hazard area, right? And a piece of property or a structure is either in that flood zone and requires flood insurance, or they're out of that flood zone and they don't require flood insurance. If a structure is inside that special flood hazard zone, then they require flood insurance. And that flood insurance, a lot of it, or one of the basis for it, is the finished floor elevation of that structure, the lowest finished floor elevation relative to the base flood elevation of that 1% chance flood that structure is in. That's kind of the foundation of how flood insurance rates are set right now through the NFIP. So Risk Rating 2.0 is basically the new method that the NFIP is going to use to set the insurance rates for structures. And it's a complete game changer. It's completely different than the way that it's been. Risk Rating 2.0 is going to use geospatial techniques to build a catastrophic model to more accurately determine risk due to flooding. It's kind of a mouthful, and so let's kind of unpack that and talk about these geospatial techniques and catastrophic models. So catastrophic models are basically using computer calculations to estimate losses that could be sustained by a structure during a catastrophe, such as a hurricane, an earthquake, tornadoes, flood or fires, and things like that. These models use a variety of information to come up with this formula to determine what the risk might be to these catastrophes. They use simulation methods to simulate what could happen, how big an event could be, how bad it could be, how bad the damage could be. So this kind of modeling isn't new. It's used extensively throughout the insurance industry right now. So risk rating 2.0 is basically going to help bring the NFIP to where it's using the same kind of platform as the rest of the insurance industry. But the geospatial techniques are if you're familiar at all with GIS, but basically it's going to show physically where things happen and where things have happened. It's going to geo-reference events and damage and catastrophes, so that FEMA will have a much more accurate way of identifying where floods could be and what the magnitude of the impact of those floods could be. So what type of data will this risk rating 2.0, this model, use? Well, it's going to use a variety of things, but one of them is going to be the distance of your structure from the flooding source. Right now, we all know that the size of a floodplain can be really vastly different, especially like along a river or something like that, or even along the coastline, depending on what that topography looks like, right? So your floodplain could be really narrow, or your floodplain could be really wide. So your structure might be really close to a flooding source, but may not require flood insurance if it's not within that special flood hazard area. That's going to change, it sounds like, with this new risk rating 2.0. That distance from that flooding source is going to be a major factor. Also, what type and size is the flooding source? Kind of that, that risk base. Is your flooding source the ocean? Is it a lake? Is it a river? If it is a river, is it a big river? What kind of flood event could you expect from that river? So kind of the type and size of that flooding source is going to play a major role. Also, another type of flooding source may not just be the physical feature, but it might be, is it going to be a hurricane? It could be a storm event. So is that flooding source going to be a hurricane or a storm surge? Tsunami? What's the source of that flood? Also, what is the elevation of your structure relative to that flooding source? Notice that that's not talking about an elevation certificate or relative to the BFE, but simply the elevation of that structure relative to the flooding source is also going to be one of the pieces of data used in this model. Replacement value of your structure. Right now FEMA's rates isn't specifically set on the replacement value, and that's a huge thing in the insurance industry, right, is your replacement value. And so that's going to be a factor that's going to be part of this model going forward. And then your foundation type of your structure. And, we all know that your foundation type can really affect how resilient or floodworthy your structure is, and how much damage it could or could not sustain is really dependent on that foundation type. And then also this model is going to look at not just the 1% chance flood event. It's going to look at a variety of flood frequencies to determine those rates. We know that some high repetitive loss structures flood during more frequent floods, maybe the 10% chance flood, or the 50% chance flood, or the 2% chance flood. So rather than just depending on data for that 1% chance flood, we're going to be looking at FEMA is going to be looking at a variety of flood frequencies. And then historic data. FEMA has a ton of historic data on flood events. The exact location of where those floods were, the inundation. They're going to be looking at what damage was done, what types of structures were damaged, the magnitude of those flood events, and geospatially, where location-wise that damage took place from those floods. So that data, that historic information, will be used to help predict the catastrophe or the extent of the damage from a catastrophe. This model is also going to use other data as well, not just from its own historic information, but it's also going to be using data sets from other government agencies as well as the private sector. It's one of the data sets it's going to use is from the USGS 3D elevation data. The USGS is working on creating a complete nationwide baseline of high resolution elevation data, which is going to be incredible. They're expected, or they're projected to hope to have this stuff done by 2023. That's their hope. They're gathering that data now. There's different states that are working on collecting LiDAR data to be a part of that. But the hope is to have really good 3D data that will be available, and this will be one of the data sets that FEMA would use. Also, NOAA has storm surge data. NOAA has historic storm surge data, and that information will also be a part of the data sets that FEMA will use. They also have things like wind data and tropical rainfall data. That sort of information will also be part of the model. And also, one of the other entities that will provide data is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They have lots of data sets that can be really, really valuable when it comes to working on or completing this model. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has national levee database information. So they know which levees are certified and which ones aren't certified, but they know where those levees are. Those are maps, so that's information that FEMA will use. They have soil data. They have topographic data. They have data on dams and locks and things like that that obviously are important when you're trying to figure out flood risk. So this is just an idea of the types of information that will be put into this model for risk rating 2.0. This isn't complete by any means, but this is the information that at least I've gleaned so far as to what FEMA is going to be using. You might have noticed that I did not include the special flood hazard area as part of the data set that FEMA is going to use. And that's because it's not going to be part of it. Our understanding is that insurance rates will no longer be based on whether a structure is in or out of that special flood hazard area. So yeah, our flood insurance rate maps are not going to be a part of that. So how's this going to affect us as local floodplain managers? Suddenly, kind of the basis for a lot of what we do, those flood insurance rate maps, it's going to change. We know for right now that our floodplains aren't going away. We have floodplains, right? Floodplains are going to continue to exist. We're still going to have floodplain maps. And the NFIP ordinances, our floodplain ordinances, those aren't going to change. Those things are part of what's called the Code of Federal Regulations. Those are our laws that are in place and aren't things that change quickly. FEMA is actually working on the flood insurance rates because that is one area that they can work on and adjusting those. And that's not something that is restricted as much. And so they have the latitude to work on those rates. They don't have the latitude to quickly change our floodplain ordinances and those regulations. New construction in the special flood hazard areas is still going to require mandatory flood insurance. That's for right now. We know that for sure. It sounds like that's not going to change. So anything new that's going to happen in your special flood hazard areas, you're still going to, those folks are still going to be required to have flood insurance. The lowest finished floor elevation for structures that are going to be built within your special flood hazard areas are still going to have that lowest floor. It's still going to have to be above the BFE or whatever minimum that you have set for your local ordinances. So that's not going to change. What it will change is we're probably going to see, once risk grading 2.0 gets adopted, that there's not going to be as many requests for LOMAs, letter of map amendments, or letters of map revision, because being in or out of that special flood hazard area is no longer going to affect the premium that policyholder will pay. So not really a big motivation to go through that process, right? Also, when your customer comes in for a building permit, you're not going to be able to say to them whether or not they're going to need flood insurance based on how or where they build, because that's not going to be something that's going to be shown on a map that you're going to be able to provide for them. That's going to be something you're going to have to refer them to their insurance carrier to get that information. And what about elevation certificates? My understanding so far is that they may not be a part of this model that the NFIP is going to use. This risk grading 2.0 is going to look at the elevation of the structure relative to the flooding source, but not necessarily to the BFE. So at some point, elevation certificates might become a thing of the past. And of course, our FEMA flood insurance rate maps. Flood insurance rate map. Well, if we no longer have flood insurance based on a map, then what happens to our flood insurance rate maps? Well, clearly their role is going to change dramatically. Is FEMA going to stop creating flood insurance rate maps or creating maps? For now, I don't see that happening. I think FEMA is going to stay in the map business. But in the future, who knows what the NFIP's map division's role might be. It's probably going to change, but we don't really know exactly what that's going to look like, do we? So what about the National Flood Insurance Program's regulations? We kind of talked about those being kind of mandated, or those are restricted by the Code of Federal Regulations. Those things aren't things that change fast. Those are laws, national laws. The CRS program, definitely a part of our floodplain regulations. We have to submit information to FEMA. We have to comply with that. How we comply with the CRS and how CRS looks could definitely change, couldn't it? If you're no longer required to keep elevation certificates because they're not required, then maybe some of the things that we do, maybe keeping that data isn't gonna be required. If your flood insurance rates are no longer set by that 1% chance flood zone, then perhaps our communication to our customers about flood risk changes. Maybe it's not just limited to the people whose property is within that special flood hazard area. Maybe that message is going to look different in the future as far as how we communicate risk. You know, we know that clearly this one leg of the National Flood Insurance Program is changing, the insurance leg. And so those other two legs of the NFIP are probably going to have to change too for that three-legged stool to be balanced and to work down the road, right? So that's just, yeah, it's an exciting time because there's a lot of changes that I think are going to happen to the NFIP over the next few years. It's going to be really interesting to see how things play out. So for right now, that three-legged stool, I mean, for the foreseeable future is going to be kind of under construction or maybe a little bit of reconstruction as it goes through this transformation. So I guess my suggestion is that you get involved. As local floodplain administrators, this is our lives. This is really valuable and really important to the way that we function, to the way our communities, how we help manage our floodplains. If risk rating 2.0 is going to make such a major change to the flood insurance industry and to our maps, or maybe our maps go away at some point, communicate to FEMA, communicate to the NFIP about what you want to see, what you think the future of floodplain management should look like. Share your opinion, ask questions, let FEMA know how you feel. Do you think mitigation should play a bigger role in floodplain management? This is the time as FEMA starts making these transitions making these changes. This is the time to let our feelings and our thoughts and our desires be known. So if you get onto FEMA's website, you'll find the NFIP Transformation and Risk Rating 2.0 webpage. And right in smack dab in the middle of the webpage is this email address that you can send questions and comments and things to. So I highly encourage you to participate in that and to communicate with FEMA during this time. So when is Risk Rating 2.0 going to be implemented? It is going to be implemented, at least the schedule right now is for October of 2021. That's a little over a year away from now. And so that's not very far out there. I'd encourage you to start anticipating what those changes might look like, how you're going to be able to communicate to people in your community about it, because I'm sure you're going to be getting calls. So I encourage you to go to the website and stay informed and look for new updates and information about it, so that you'll be able to talk about it with people in your community. And with that, thanks very much for watching. I hope you learned something and are excited about the future. And appreciate you guys being here.
All right. So thank you again to Angela, who's our presenter today. Angela, thank you for being with us, taking a couple minutes to answer some Q&A.
Yeah, no problem.
So we got a bunch of questions on this one, so we're going to do a couple of them real quick. It seems like it's a pretty popular subject. So first one is, will Risk Rating 2.0, will it be based on modeling or aerial photography of actual events?
Yeah, this will probably be based on a combination of things. And I'll be really honest, there's just not a lot of information out there yet about Risk Rating 2.0. I based some of my information on a presentation from Tony Haig with FEMA this last fall at a conference I was at, and then what I could find on the internet, which really there's, like I said, there's just not a lot out there, but we do know that they are going to use a lot of actual real-time data and stuff that can be updated on a regular basis. So aerial photography and things like that will definitely be used, especially that kind of data that can come from a flood event, so you can actually see those limits. It's not something that will be based on a hydraulic model.
Great. New construction, will it need flood insurance if it has paid with cash?
No, that will change. As far as I understand, these rates are going to only apply to those or homes that have a federally backed mortgage.
Okay. Will this affect NFIP requirements as well, i.e. disaster assistance and insurance reductions?
You know, I don't know how it can't. Kind of like I mentioned early in the presentation, the NFIP is like a three-legged stool. There's a lot of things that make up the insurance and the mapping. It's just not something that's gonna, it can't be done in a silo. It's gonna affect the other legs of that stool. So I see that the CRS program and all the other sectors of the NFIP are gonna have to morph when this gets implemented. Like I said in the presentation, this is scheduled to take effect not October of this year. Actually, part of it was going to be a two-phase approach. They were going to apply it to, I believe, residential this October, and then they were going to roll in the commercial next October, on the October of 2021. But because this is such a complex project and a pretty major, obviously drastic undertaking, huge undertaking by FEMA, they've decided to delay it and roll out both of them at the same time in October of 2021. So hopefully, since we're out, 16 months or so from then, we'll have some time to be able to take a look at what they come up with as their catastrophic model for this. So we'll be able to see all of the components are going into it. Right now, I don't really know what all of them are. I just know that there are some things that are definitely more like the insurance industry. They're going to use some more actual data that's on the ground. And thankfully, it's going to be the kinds of data that's geo-referenced, that hopefully will be updated on a regular basis. So things won't be as outdated as they might be right now. I'm hoping that that's what's going to happen. I'm pretty excited about it, though, and I think everybody probably in the insurance industry is probably pretty excited about it. It sounds like it's going to simplify things for the insurance industry, which will be great, because if you've ever called and asked about flood insurance, it's really confusing and people are really intimidated by it. So hopefully it'll be less confusing. As far as insurance rates, somebody had asked a question about insurance rates increasing. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that for some people, they're going to see some insurance rate increases. And then there's probably some other people that their insurance rates may go down, or maybe they'll go away if their flood maps change. That's really hard to say. I do know that the caps that are set on flood insurance rate premium increases isn't going to change. So I know that right now, I believe I think annually they can't increase more than, like, and I'm not an insurance person, but I think it's maybe 18% is the max that they can increase in a year. And I know that's going to still apply when this goes into place. Let's see, certified levies be rated with risk point 2. So somebody asked, how will properties behind certified levies be rated with risk point 2.0? And that I don't know. I do know that part of this matrix, or this model that's put together, is going to look at historic data. So has that levee ever breached? Has there ever been damage to structures behind that levee? And was that home one of them? I know that sort of thing will go into it. So there's a variety of things. I'm just going to try and glance through and see if I can read a couple of others. A lot of these, there's lots of questions. That's great. I wish I had more answers. Let's see. Will NFIP requirements?
Well, I know one that kind of popped up that caught my attention during it was, will risk rating 2.0 geographically expand the area under which flood insurance will be mandated? I think you kind of touched on that, but do you want to talk to that for another 30 seconds or so?
I think it's definitely probably going to have the potential to increase and expand that increase, or add more people to the insurance pool. Right now with our flood insurance rates, you're in the 100-year flood zone, the 1% chance, or you're out. And literally 2 houses can be side by side, and one is in and one is out, which really doesn't make sense, because we all know that floods just don't read maps very well. They just don't. So when you look at where a flood actually ends up, it really may not look exactly like it looks on a map. So this, I think, is going to be more accurate. And maybe your home hasn't flooded, but maybe the house next door has. So maybe you're going to have to get flood insurance, but maybe it won't be as much. Maybe it'll be a lesser premium. And so I think it's going to actually be more realistic to your actual risk. I know that's the hope anyway.
Yeah. Well, Angela, thank you so much again for being here today to do this Q&A with us. And thanks again for a great presentation.
Oh, thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right, take care. So that's it, folks, for that's the end of our session. We want to thank again all of our great presenters that are here with us today, as well as our session sponsor, which was CDM Smith. Thank you again for helping to make this possible. And with that, guys, this is Alex signing off.